Mistakes come back to haunt the Denver Broncos late against the Las Vegas Raiders in Sunday's season opening loss. What stood out? How did the Broncos offense look? And where do they go for here in week 2 with the Commanders coming to town? You're going to get that and much more on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Denver Broncos offense looks much more improved despite the fact that they lose 17-16. What were some of the quirks that went right? What went wrong? Where can the Broncos grow from this loss here after week 1? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in to the post-game report. Unfortunately, Denver loses 17-16 at home, but I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, or whether you're watching on YouTube. Locked on Broncos is your daily go-to source for all things that's going on with the orange and blue. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Sayre, let's get straight into this post-game report here. Obviously, the biggest story for the Broncos in week 1 is, they dropped to 0-1. They lose 17-16. The dreaded 16-point, looking at it, just coming back up. They lose 17-16 last year. They lose 17-16 open of the season here in 2023. But how might things be a little bit different? I think that's where we got to maybe see the forest through the trees here. Obviously, a loss is a loss. It's frustrating. Broncos fans pissed off, and rightfully so. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody likes losing to the Raiders. But there are things sprinkled in throughout this team that are a little bit different than last year from an operations standpoint that you simply can't just deem the season over, as I'm already seeing here on social media.
Right, Cody. Like you said, got to be able to see the forest through the trees. It's not necessarily, people will see it as putting lipstick on a pig, right? But it's really seeing the forest through the trees at this point. You can't judge the 2023 team based on what happened in 2022. Unfortunately, it was a carbon copy really of week 1 last year, where the final score ends up ironically being 17-16. The kicking game ends up being a huge difference maker. But look, we're not here to put any lipstick on any pigs. We're here to help see the forest through the trees and explain exactly what went down, how things need to get better, and how they can get better. But I think we got to start by talking about this kicking game, Cody, which has been a thorn in the Broncos side. I know a lot of fans on Twitter, like you said, a very dangerous place to be during a football game that your team is playing in. A lot of fans are clamoring for Brandon McManus, and I want to, if I could pound the table without ruining my setup right here, I'd be pounding the table, telling you all, Brandon McManus was just as bad last year as all the rest of these guys that are missing kicks all over the NFL, not just in Denver. Kickers are missing kicks everywhere. I was just watching Cowboys and Giants before we started recording this episode. I saw kickers from both teams missing field goals and extra points. It's not just Wil Lutz, but that's not what matters, is it? The fact is that the Broncos struggled in the kicking game last year. They're now struggling again this year. So what does that mean? Well, everybody would prefer the devil they know versus the devil that they don't, which is Wil Lutz at this point. And so obviously, I get why a lot of people are clamoring for Brandon McManus, but man, he was one of the worst kickers in the NFL last year. So I guess if that's your great alternative at this point, it's really an unfortunate position for everyone to be in. So you got to hope that Wil Lutz bounces back, but at the same time, man, those 4 points, they not only would they have been the difference in the game, they would have changed just that extra point that he missed on the first touchdown, Cody, would have changed the entire complexion of the game at 17-all late in the fourth quarter.
100%. It's a snowball effect, right? And look, we'll obviously dive into the Broncos' defensive performance a little bit. I know there's some things that we'll have to obviously break down and kind of dissect here, but yeah, I mean, you look at the outcome of a game. Okay, you lose 17-16. You make the extra point. Okay, worst case scenario here. Okay, hey, 17-17, maybe Denver goes to overtime again against the Raiders. And who knows maybe how the matchup goes there. Oh, you make the 55-yard field goal. Okay, hey, it's 20-17 at that point. And maybe late in that fourth quarter, it forces Denver and it forces the Raiders to even try to play a little bit differently because they're in desperation mode, at least trying to get into field goal range to maybe possibly find a way to tie the game up. But just mistakes in the kicking game definitely cost the Denver Broncos here. But, Sayre, we can harp on that. Look, here's the thing with Wil Lutz. The one thing he talked about is just that he was disappointed himself. He knows that, hey, he's going to be hard on himself for the next 24 hours, but he's got a job to do, and that's to come back out there, and that's to bounce back next week. But here's what Wil Lutz said in the locker room. We're able to catch this here on Locked On Broncos.
I was frustrating. I thought I hit that ball well. Just moved on me at the end, so be back. We'll look at it. See what happens.
And he said on that 55 1-yard, he said he felt like he hit it well. It didn't go where he wanted it to go. And, obviously he was frustrated after the game in the locker room, but he met with us in the media and he was open about it. Yeah, you got to make your kicks. And that's the thing. And he even said Sean Payton's job's not to worry about him. It's it's that he's just got to do his job better. That Wil Lutz does. He understands that. Can't change it, but unfortunately very costly in this game. But Sayre, I also think we got to talk about the Broncos offense here. Now, I think because we're going to see 17-16. A lot of people are going to see 16. Obviously, Denver's going to have to put up more points than 16, but the overall flow, Denver had 6 total offensive drives in this game. If Lutz makes that field goal, 4 of their 6 drives lead to points here, but 3 of their 6 drives that they had were 10 or more plays, and 2 of those resulting in obviously some scoring plays here for Denver. I felt like overall Russell Wilson was much more efficient in his operation as the quarterback. I thought he looked a lot more comfortable here in the offense with Sean Payton. Very efficient. Obviously, 2 touchdowns on the day, one to Cortland Sutton, one to little Jordan Humphrey. But what were your impressions of Russell Wilson from the offensive standpoint, and maybe some things that they can build on here going forward?
Well, I thought at the end of the first half, I thought Russ was back to cooking, Cody. I really did. I felt like it was a great first half for him in the offense. Very methodical, a lot of converted third downs. Russell getting outside the pocket and making throws and hitting guys accurately, specifically those 2 touchdowns to Lil Jordan Humphrey and Cortland Sutton in the back of the end zone was really vintage Russell Wilson. A lot of times what I remember Russell Wilson watching the Red Zone channel back in the day, Cody, when he was on the Seahawks, I just remember a lot of those plays like that where he's finding receivers in the back of the end zone, getting into the red zone consistently, just methodically getting down. And you see 27 out of 34 completions versus attempts. Like, that's really solid. The thing is the 177 passing yards, the Broncos were really intentional about, like you said, trying to dominate time of possession. And there's a reason for that. Obviously, on the other side of the field, Josh Jacobs, you do not want him dictating time of possession. So you want to be the one doing it, which is a sign that the Broncos really did execute their game plan well. They obviously just missed out on really important scoring opportunities. We talked about the missed field goal, but then you also add in 2 punts in there. That's 3 of your 6 possessions that, that's all you got. And so really you had to maximize those opportunities that you didn't punt, the 4 possessions that you should have scored. The Broncos, like you said, should have had at least 20 points, if not more, after the roughing the kicker on Riley Dixon. You get inside the 10-yard line. That was a brutal drive to end in a field goal when you should have had 6 points or 7. Man, the offense, though, to me, looked much better. Russ, in particular, looked better. And what did we talk about a lot last year on this show? Feels like the offense can't do the little things well. I feel like we saw Russell Wilson doing those things, at least for sure, in the first half.
And that's why I encourage fans, look, losing week 1 is not fun. It stinks. And obviously fans are upset. And like I said, we're never going to tell you that you have no right to be upset. But, let's apply logic within the emotional aspect of it. The 24 hours after a game are always emotional here. I still think writing this team off after a week 1 loss is way too premature when the offense is doing some things better. Now there's some things that they'll obviously have to clean up, and we'll dive deeper to that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show, our post-game report, is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Then all you do is you add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread word that you're hiring. They have simple tools like screening questions, which make it easy to focus on candidates who have the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. Make sure you close out the 2023 year with the right team member today on LinkedIn Jobs. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Are we about to put a ransom out for the Denver Broncos pass rush? Where are they? Why didn't they show up? What did the Raiders do to neutralize that aspect of the Denver Broncos defense? Or what was it the Broncos were doing specifically that led to a lack of pass rush against the Raiders? We're going to talk about that and more on this episode, this post-game reaction episode of Locked On Broncos. But before we do, got to give a huge shout out to all of you everydayers out there that listen to Locked On Broncos, free and available everywhere that you get your podcasts, as well as free on YouTube. So join in the discussion however you choose to do so. We look forward to it, especially after games. We know, like Cody said, these 24 hours full of emotion. Bring it at us. We can handle it, and we love to discuss it. It gives us ideas of things to talk about, and as well as for you, gives you an outlet to kind of just vent after a tough loss like this. But nevertheless, we appreciate all of you that choose to make us part of your day, however you choose to do so, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Cody, the pass rush, non-existent. Everybody's talking about it today. Frank Clark, 0 sacks, 0 QB hits. Randy Gregory, 0 sacks, 0 QB hits. Jonathan Cooper, same thing. Nick Benito, same thing. What's up with the pass rush? Why did the Broncos not get at Jimmy Garoppolo in this game?
I think it's tough to answer outright, because I think so much of it, we can go back and watch the game broadcast. What's it going to tell us? I'll get back on the all 22, obviously, as that comes out, and we'll get a better picture here. But I could just say from my observation, seeing it live from the press box, I thought that the Raiders, they did a really good job of switching some things up. Like, they'd go shotgun sometimes, but mainly, hey, they're going under center here with Jimmy G. They're going fake the handoff, get the ball out quickly. I mean, that's really what Jimmy G was doing. They were trying to utilize the quick passing game. They even got a little tricky. Like, their only real downfield shots that we saw from them, they had a tight end seam to Hooper at one point in this game, but then they tried a flea flicker to Davante Adams, which didn't work out because Patrick Surtain had the coverage on him. We'll obviously talk about his performance as well coming up here on today's episode of the show. But, I think it's a little bit more minute in a sense than, okay, the pass rush was not necessarily non-existent. Like, they obviously did not get to the quarterback in the facet in which you need to here. But I thought that the Raiders' game plan offensively, just from watching it live, Sayre, I thought they did a really good job. Hey, they ran the football with Josh Jacobs. They tried to get some things going there, but then they really just attacked medium to short in this game here. And so, look, obviously, you're going to have to find a way to mitigate that because you're going to have to play them once again at the end of the season. Hey, the stakes could be very, very high in that particular game there. But I'll have to go back and watch the All-22 a little bit just to see what was happening. I did feel like at times, you could see it on the game broadcast. You can also see it live. I also felt like Zach Allen was held several times and it was never called. I felt like he did a really good job on some pass rush moves where he was getting inside, but I guess they didn't see that happening necessarily. Not to say it's not a reason they obviously lost, but I think that definitely impacted some of the results that happened, defensively there for them. But I think Denver's thing, penalties on defense, that's really what hurt them, Sarah. I think when you put it in retrospect here, okay, the Raiders, they scored 2 touchdowns in this game, right? Jacoby Myers was the guy there. And we'll obviously talk about Damarri Mathis here in a second, but you look at these 2 drives where he had scored a touchdown, or the Raiders would score a touchdown. What was the difference on that? Like, Denver had several 3rd down situations. They even had a 4th down situation. They couldn't get off the field, or there was a penalty that extended a drive that allowed the Raiders to go on and score here. So obviously those are things you have to clean up. Justin Simmons talked about it post-game. Sean Payton talked about it. Just too many penalties. And look, this was a high penalty game. I mean, on both sides, the Raiders and the Broncos, I think there was 20 combined penalties called in this game. And it's just unfortunate. Bill Vinovich, that's his specialty here. But ultimately, I think it's just not being able to get out the field on a couple of those drives led to touchdowns. And look, I think one guy who's going to take a lot of heat this week and has already taken it on social media from fans, Damarri Mathis, a cornerback opposite of Patrick Surtain. I think we can all say here logically, Sayre, right? I know fans are emotional. He didn't have a good game. He had a bad game. I think we can all say that, right? But, and what I mean by that is we're already seeing people say, cut this guy, trade this guy. Like, this is the NFL. Guys are going to struggle. They're going to make mistakes. We've seen Damarri Mathis have good games. We've seen Damarri Mathis bounce back. This was a bad game for him, 110%. And here's the thing. If he can't get it fixed, then I think that's when you look into it. But after week one, I think it's way too premature here to come out here and say, okay, hey, get rid of this guy. I think Damarri's a good young cornerback. You got to let a young guy like this learn from that mistake and learn from the opportunity, man, to go out there and get better here in week two. If the problem persists, then I think we revisit this conversation.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to just give up on a talented player like that after one bad game. We saw last year what happened after he had the poor game against the Chargers. He came out and had a great rest of the season where he didn't really even have to worry about him much at all on his side of the field. So the jury's out on Damarri Mathis. Young players, as we've said on the show many times, development and progression in the NFL is oftentimes not linear. Everybody wants these guys to rapidly ascend up the ranks just like that. And it just doesn't happen that way. So you've got to really be able to kind of take these things in stride when you're looking at player development. But I get it. The expectations for Damarri Mathis were relatively high, right? I mean, there was really no contention for his job at this offseason. And to come out and play poorly like that, you'll have fans questioning, well, why wasn't his job up for grabs, really? So I get that aspect of it, and I know you get that as well, Cody. So it's a tough game all around, and who knows how much better Damarri Mathis would have been were it not for the pass rush not getting. And like you said, the Raiders had a great game plan drawn up in the event that Josh Jacobs was shut down, because we got to make mention Josh Jacobs had only 2.5 yards per carry in this game, and yet the Raiders remain undefeated when he plays against the Denver Broncos, which I now believe, Cody, that's up to 8-0 or 7-0 or something like that. 7. So it's embarrassing one way or the other, and we're halfway to a full season's worth at this point. So let's just, I mean, you got to give these young guys a chance to develop, but at the same time, I understand that you want that linear development. You want everybody to be as good as Pat Surtain when they're playing corner for the Denver Broncos, but that just doesn't happen. So tough game for Damarri Mathis, tough game for the pass rushers, but got an opportunity once again in week 2 against Washington to kind of right the ship.
And that's the thing, right? What were the two biggest keys coming into this game? It wasn't necessarily pressure Jimmy G. It was, okay, limit Josh Jacobs in the run game, which they did that. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the output there for him, 19 carries and 48 total yards. His biggest run that he had was 7 yards, Sayre. So you do that. What is it? Minimize Davante Adams' big playability. The Broncos did just that. Patrick Surtain had a great day in coverage against him. He had only allowed 2 catches for 11 yards on 5 total targets while shadowing him on 16 out of 26 possible reps in this game, according to NFL Next Gen stats. And he also had a career-high 3 passes defensed in the Broncos' loss on Sunday. So, yeah, obviously not the prettiest operation here in week 1 for Denver, but I think if you separate the emotion of the outcome and we go back and we watch the tape and we look at, there's things that Denver can obviously go back and adjust and fix, but there's things that they can build on as well. So I think it's way too premature, folks. I get it. You're emotional. Don't write this team off after 1 week, though. I think that's the conversation that needs to be had. Obviously, that's going to be a key for the Broncos next week against Sam Howell and that Commanders offense that obviously they're now coming off a win. They're going to be coming into Denver hungry to get a road win under new ownership here. And the key is going to be able to get after the quarterback, but also have a bounce back from Damarri Mathis in coverage in week 2 of the NFL regular season. That's why we tune in. That's why we watch every single week here at Broncos Country. We're going to go to some other Broncos news and notes, talk about some other dynamics about the Broncos offensive performance production. How come they didn't go deep downfield consistently in this game? We'll tell you why on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, they can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets back guaranteed. Once again, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets back guaranteed. Plus, every single customer who bets $5, they will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So if you didn't get to catch all the action that you want to see on the NFL side of things, all you have to do to get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket is just bet $5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNFL and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, our post-game report, make sure as you're watching or you're listening to this podcast, share your thoughts on the outcome of Sunday's Week 1 season opener. Unfortunately, a disappointing outcome for the Denver Broncos as they lose 17-16 in Sean Payton's first official game in the regular season as the team's head coach here. Sayre, I know that there were some questions that a lot of Broncos fans had here. We talked about the operation of the offense, how it seemed much more smoother. I liked all the motion that we saw here, but I think the big key that we can talk about, not having Jerry Jeudy is a big element of that. Now, I will say this, watching him pregame, he did a little bit of a workout in front of Dan Dalrymple, the strength and conditioning coach, head coach Sean Payton, and general manager George Payton. I felt like he was moving well, but I think they made the right decision here to say, you know what, let's not do it this week. Let's give you another week here. And I think that there could be some momentum building for him to return against the Commanders, but they are also lost, as we talked about earlier, Greg Dulcich to a hamstring injury in the second quarter. And Sayre, I think in the late second half of that game, you can definitely tell that was a huge, huge loss for them because they had to connect on one play. Russell Wilson found Adam Troutman just doesn't have the speed that Greg Dulcich has. But, you know, in a situation like that, you're like, oh man, that's where they really do miss a guy like Dulcich. In your opinion, were there any other questions you had about the offensive side of the ball?
Well, I think the lack of a wide receiver one on this roster is becoming more and more apparent by, I guess, the game. You can date that back to however long you want to date it back to. Nothing against the guys that they have, Cody, but really in a game where Jerry Jeudy can't play, my expectation, and maybe unfair, I guess I get that. It's possible that this is very unfair of me to expect. I expect Courtland Sutton to then be the wide receiver one. And I expect him against a young Raiders secondary or a young corner, which he was able to go up against a number of times in this game, or Marcus Peters, who, quite frankly, Cody, is not the same guy that we once saw coming out of Washington back in 2014 or whatever it was. So I expected Courtland Sutton to have a much bigger game. Now, I know he drew a big penalty that got the Broncos into the red zone. I also know he had a touchdown in this game, but 4 catches for 32 yards on 5 targets. That's not exactly what I was expecting from Sutton. I felt like he would have a much bigger game in this one against the Raiders. And I think that lack of a go-to threat in the second half, specifically, like you said, when Greg Dulcich went down, not that Greg was the number one receiver in this game or anything like that, but you just didn't see the Broncos have anywhere they could consistently turn in the passing game in the second half, which led to the offense stalling out, in my opinion. Like you talked about earlier, got to go back and watch the all 22 and kind of see what transpired or see if certain things were missed. Maybe Sutton was open on certain plays and he was missed out there. I don't know that 100%, but just based on watching this game live, felt like he had one really good drive, which would have been right in that second quarter there. And then other than that, I just felt like he was kind of non-existent.
Well, and I think maybe something else to keep in mind here, Russell Wilson connected with 11 different receiving options in this game. So, I mean, you can tell there's definitely a balanced attack on trying to get the ball to multiple people, including running backs, fullbacks. I mean, we're seeing everybody get involved here. And yeah, obviously you want to see a little bit more out of Courtland Sutton. You know, I think in this offensive game plan, Sayre, it really just seemed like the idea for them, for Sean Payton, and obviously you see this at the time of possession, Denver controlled it for 32 minutes and 8 seconds of this. It was really to run the football. And obviously Denver, they accounted for 94 total yards rushing, where we did get to see Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine. And look, I think Samaje had some big plays, obviously in the receiving game and the run game. I think it was great to see Javonte get some more action and get some more run on after coming back from the ACL injury. I thought both those guys ran relatively well here. We didn't see a lot of quarterback designs here for Russell Wilson, which is interesting, but I think we also had some questions from some fans. I know you also had this question as well, and I'll share my thoughts on it, on why we didn't see the Broncos attack downfield more. Sayre, I think, to be honest with you, seeing them being 12 and 13 personnel a lot of this game, or bringing in an extra offensive lineman, they brought in Quinn Bailey on certain situations. I really believe it was to mitigate what Max Crosby could do. And obviously Max Crosby ended up getting a sack on Russell Wilson. But I think when you have to set up and dial up a deep shot, what are you usually seeing? You're seeing play action. You're seeing a 5-step drop or a 7-step drop. And that allows more time for Max Crosby, a guy who's just got a relentless motor, to get after you. And I think that was part of maybe the game plan here for Denver, is trying to mitigate that by, hey, let's bring in some extra protection. Let's get the ball out of our hands quickly. And obviously Russell Wilson, dink and dunk, making some plays, obviously with his legs outside the pocket. But I think that's why we didn't necessarily see too many deep shots downfield. And I think not having a guy like Jerry Jeudy obviously plays a role in that. Cortland obviously had a pass interference call, like, against the defensive back that allowed him to score on that one drive there. So it was there in some spurts, but the game and obviously the impact of seeing the moon ball, especially, hey, with Marvin Mims, you want to see that here, but it didn't seem like that was in the Broncos game plan specifically in this game. And obviously I think the all-22 is going to give us a little bit more insight. We'll find out a little bit more from Russell Wilson. We'll hear from Sean Payton on Monday as he does a little bit of a conference call with the media. And then we'll find out when the Broncos get back to the practice field on Wednesday here, Sayre. But I think we should definitely touch on some other news and notes here. Obviously, Caden Stearns left the game on the cart in the first quarter with a knee injury. And the belief is that it's a serious injury. But did see Mike Kliss tweet out, our good friend there, that they believe and they hope that the ACL is intact, which could be good. But I'm gutted for a guy like Caden Stearns, man, because like I said, I've had a chance to see this guy in the offseason go through the strength program, come back from the hip, and really put in so much work to be ready for this year. And then unfortunately, just a freak thing on a blitz play happened there, and carted off, just highly emotional. Guys in the locker room, I can tell you this, they're just devastated for him. Defensively, offensively, they know how much they value Caden, what Caden can bring to the table. Just sucks, man. And we got to talk about, injuries here in week one. Unfortunately, it's part of the game, but dang, doesn't make it any easier to talk about.
No, it sure doesn't, especially a guy like that who seemed to be in line for a big time breakout this season. And, shout out to Kareem Jackson for coming in and making a couple of big plays in his absence, right? So the Broncos obviously had to make an adjustment there. And without Caden Stearns, Cody, it may open the door for somebody like JL Skinner, who a lot of fans have been wanting to see. And maybe he gets a shot now. Maybe we'll see him play more of that box role with Kareem Jackson out there. But definitely wishing the best for Caden Stearns. It's his third NFL season, so thankfully this didn't happen in a contract year. He'll be able to come back out next year, hopefully strong, depending on the injury. Of course, we don't know any sort of time frame, but anytime you hear those words, serious knee injury, certainly it makes you think that a guy's going to need as much time as possible to recover. So wishing him the best there. Obviously, there's no real time frame at this point on the Greg Dulcich injury, which a lot of people asked me about, Cody, wondering about that. Yeah. I know you said, you told me you saw him in the locker room, that he seemed to be in decent spirits at least. So yeah. I guess maybe that's a good sign, if nothing else.
Yeah. And look, and obviously guys in the locker room, a loss is never fun. These guys, they obviously take it very hard. But I also think that there's also just some optimism. They've expressed, like, you go around the different scrums there, a lot of these guys are saying, hey, I know a lot of fans are frustrated about last year, and I know this isn't a great start, but they believe that they're a different team, and they believe that they're going to get there. Let's hear one more thing here from Broncos wide receiver Courtland Sutton, who met with us following the game.
We started off hot, but unfortunately we weren't able to get the job done. And, at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing, the moral victories, I'm kind of pushing them joints to the side. It's more of, getting the job done, and we weren't able to get that done today.
And that's for Courtland. Like, Courtland's coming out and saying, like, hey, like, there are no moral victories. We got to come out here and we got to do a better job. I'd say overall there's some confidence in there from those guys that, hey, in week 2, they're going to bounce back in Broncos country. We're hopeful that that is the case for all of our sakes here, because I know obviously nobody likes a loss. But once again, recollect your thoughts here. We're going to bring it all week long here, Locked On Broncos. You'll hear a crossover episode a little bit later on the week, but we'll give you updates on Caden Stearns, Greg Dulcich as the week progresses, as the Broncos prepare for week number 2. Week 1, not the start you wanted, but there's a long season ahead, folks. The NFL is a week-to-week league here, and things change very, very drastically. We'll see where the Broncos are at here. Week 2. Stay tuned here, Locked On Broncos, every single day, all year long. We got you covered for all your Broncos news, content coverage, and more. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.